I'm Robin Bennett, for those that haven't met me before. I'm one of the co-founders of the Dog Gurus. Susan Briggs is our other person over there. She's the other co-founder of the Dog Gurus. We've been together working in the pet industry for many years. We finally took the leap and joined forces and formed the Dog Gurus about 7 or 8 years ago now.
Time
And
flies when you're having fun.
exactly. And if you haven't seen anything about the Dog Gurus, we are a business that does business consulting and staff training for the pet industry. So you can learn all about that on our website. But what we're going to talk about today is enrichment. So we have been talking about enrichment, adding enrichment to daycare,
Long
like
time.
right after for a long time. Right after we formed the Dog Gurus, we really started promoting enrichment as an additional service for your daycare, because frankly we thought it was better for the dogs, we thought it was better for the staff, we thought it was healthier for the dogs, and it's more revenue. When COVID hit, a lot of people who were wondering about enrichment just took the leap and just started adding it because of the revenue, mostly because it was going to help them, and they were starting to limit numbers of dogs, and some places got shut down. And so COVID put a fast forward button on the whole thing, which we think is actually great for our industry. But since then, we've actually seen enrichment being used in every different type of service, pet service that you might have, whether it's training, whether it's pet sitting or dog walking or grooming or daycare or lodging. There's a lot of ways you can include enrichment. Enrichment's a huge buzzword right now among pet parents. There's a Facebook group that has thousands and thousands of members that are literally pet parents that just want to have fun with their dogs. So pet parents are looking for this type of activity for the dogs. Pet parents don't necessarily just want to drop their dog off, have the dog play all day, which is the model that Susan and I had when we started. And that's been the model of daycare for many years. But we've been trying to change that anyway. So we're going to just kick it off and really talk about some of the enrichment activities you can do in some of these different services. And sometimes you have to be creative, but we have found that our members are great at being creative, and we've just got a lot of ideas for how you can start including enrichment. And before I throw that over to Susan to talk about, I will say that all of the stuff we're talking about, we would also say charge more for.
Right.
So we are not just saying change everything and for the same price, do all these other activities now. We would be saying maybe this is an add on, additional service, additional fee, or maybe you do convert your whole facility to being only enrichment, which we have worked with a lot of facilities that do that. We also work with a lot of facilities that keep what they're currently doing and they just add a VIP option that includes enrichment. But however you decide that would work for you, we are talking about generating more revenue from this, because it's not, it is going to cost you more to do these activities because you're going to need the staff to help you do them. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that to begin with. So Stephanie said the Dog Gurus are enrichment pioneers. Thanks, Stephanie. That's awesome. We appreciate that. All right. So what do you want to talk about first, Susan?
Let's talk about daycare so we get that out of the way, and we'd love your questions. Yeah, we started talking about adding some type of enrichment daycare option into your daycare services many years ago, and for a few reasons. What we began to see was there are some of those young adult pups that really play and have a great time every day they're in group play. But unfortunately, there's a lot of dogs that just hang out and what we would call maybe wallflowers. And this could be more senior dogs, it could be some of the smaller dogs, it could be a more kind of shy dog. And we also heard from members that there would be dogs that I think sometimes are like too smart and would end up being troublemakers because they got bored in daycare. And so it was really these dogs that we started saying, what else could be done to keep them more engaged? And what we all know, a lot of dogs like that one-on-one time. They like the people, maybe even more than being in the groups of dogs. And they like when people engage them in things where they have to think and use their brains. And so that's where we started with enrichment, is what kind of activities would either use their brain or really focus on natural abilities that dogs have, like not really true scent work, but hiding treats in boxes and doing like games where dogs would have to find things, and taking them out for either some one-on-one sessions, or the other thing that we found that was really successful to do with enrichment dogs and daycare is put them in smaller groups of dogs, maybe only 2 or 3 dogs, probably no more than 5 or 8. And some of the dogs that don't play in your really big groups of 25 to 30 suddenly were playing. And it just points out that dogs have to feel safe to play. And so if you have dogs that you see in your big groups aren't engaging, these are the dogs that are really good candidates for doing something more in enrichment. So, Robin, you want to talk about some of the other like activities that people added to the daycare enrichment?
Yeah, so I just opened our staff training enrichment document so I could use that as my cheat sheet. So we do have a program on how to implement daycare enrichment daycare into your facility, and we have a daycare 2.0 toolkit. So one of the documents in there is a whole staff training handout to help your staff of all the different things you can add. And so some of these are going to be best in daycare, but some of these are things you could add to lodging. You could add them as add-on activities for lodging dogs. You could, if you're going over to pet sit or dog walk at somebody's house, you could bring equipment and do some of these things. So don't feel like this is exclusively just daycare, but we do games with equipment. So any kind of equipment you have, if you're like a pet sitter or a dog walker, we recommend getting a couple of climbs you can throw in your car. And then when you go over to the pet parent's house, you can add activities and games with that climb. Obviously, if you have a pet care facility, you might have climbs, you might have agility obstacles, you might have puppy playground equipment, but any kind of things, any kind of activities, it doesn't have to be something really formal or fancy. Just any kind of fun you can have with that equipment is something you can do as an enrichment activity. New textures on floors. So this is relatively easy. Just go get carpet, go get a tarp, go get ladders, ropes, PVC pipes, whatever it is that you have that's safe around the animals. And you can just set up new textures on the floor for the dogs to walk on and around. That's actually great for puppies and actually for shy dogs too. You'll find that some dogs don't want to walk across a tarp or don't want to walk across like a ladder laying down on the floor. So that again is an activity that's going to use their brain. They're going to have to learn how to do some of those activities. You'll find some dogs that will just barrel right through them and knock things all over the place. So for those dogs, you can actually teach them to slow down and think about what they're doing. So any kind of textures on the floor. Follow the leader is a game that we have played forever in dog daycare. It's one of the basic foundation leadership exercises we teach. And that's really just getting the dogs to follow you around. If you have especially a group of dogs, getting them to follow you around as you walk through the room or walk over things or walk under things or whatever. Tricks, doing any kind of simple trick that you can teach the dog, those are usually going to be done a little bit more individually. So that's where you might have a dog that's just getting a little training session for 5 or 10 minutes as part of his enrichment day, as one of his activities during the day. It's not something that you're going to necessarily say, we will absolutely 100% teach your dog to do XYZ. Maybe you do that because we do have a trick of the month program that would be how we would sell it. But for enrichment, you're more just introducing the activity. If the dog gets it, that's great. If they don't, then work on it the next time they come in. But again, it's just a lot. There's a lot of simple tricks that you can teach dogs. And that's great for your staff who might be interested in learning a little bit more about training. You have a whole group of dogs that can be little demo dogs for that person who might be interested in training and learning about behavior. So that's a really good activity. And again, I'm not talking like really complex tricks. I'm talking like simple tricks like spin or lay down or roll over or play dead, things like that. Nose touch, teaching the dog to back up. So relatively easy things. And then we've got all kinds of tools in terms of teaching them some of those activities. So there's just so much you can do. Like really the sky is the limit. That's just really like the beginning part of it. We talk a lot about some of the activities some of you probably already do in daycare. So we call it having a party time. So maybe you already do bubbles or maybe you already do pictures. You can include those as part of enrichment activities, or maybe you only do those for the enrichment dogs that are paying for a little bit more. That includes things like introducing new sights or smells or sounds to them. So you can actually introduce dogs to doing things like nose work, where you're teaching them to find, initially we would say finding like a treat, but you can actually transition that to finding a certain scent. You could just introduce the dogs to new scents. And obviously you want to use safe scents for that, but there's all kinds of smells out there that you can buy. Everything from scents that are actually used in nose work to scents that are used for hunters, where you're just giving the dog some novel experiences. And you'll find dogs that really enjoy it. And then games with toys. We all always get asked the question, should you have toys in daycare? And some people don't. But you can actually introduce toys and have structured games. Normally, we would recommend that be in smaller groups. So when Susan was talking about maybe still having some small groups of play, I wouldn't necessarily throw a whole bunch of tennis balls with 40 dogs in a group. But if you have a group of 5 or 6 dogs, you can definitely play with some toys with those dogs. So again, and that's something, again, you can include for training. You can include that in daycare. You can include that in lodging. You can include it for pet sitting, or like you can do this for any dogs. And we did actually get asked once, how do you play games with the dogs? So, which Susan and I thought was a really weird question. But then we thought, well, I guess if you're not used to engaging dogs in that kind of activity, we did put together a document on how you can teach your staff how to safely play with the dogs. And then quiet time is the other one. I think when we think about enrichment activities, sometimes we're just thinking high energy activities, but teaching the dogs to actually settle down and just hang out is actually a valid enrichment activity. And I know Debbie Oliver with Miss Daisy, she specifically teaches dogs to chill out around other dogs so that they learn, number one, that just because you see a dog doesn't mean you have to go crazy and play. And it helps actually to build some confidence with dogs that might be nervous around other dogs. But you could also do things like story time, reading the dogs a book, which dogs actually do enjoy and will settle down. You could do music while you're having that quiet time. You can do aromatherapy. So there's a lot of ways you can structure that quiet time so that the dogs are getting some enrichment at the same time. So that is just like top, like scratching the surface on some of the activities you can use. All right, hang on. Let me check the questions really quick. So Katie said, how many dogs are in the group when doing enrichment?
It kind of depends on what enrichment activity you're doing. If it's something involving food or where you're trying to teach a skill that they haven't done before and you need focus, you might do one-on-one and these would be short sessions, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Because when you're trying to learn something, the dog will have a short attention span. For some of the other activities that Robin talked about, you might do it in groups of 2 to 3. And we do have people that do like mini play group sessions, but with smaller groups of dogs, maybe 5 to 8 at most, because what you'll find are dogs that don't play in big groups may play in smaller groups. It all goes back to they have to feel safe to play. And there are some dogs that just don't feel safe in great big groups to play. Now, they may not show signs that they're uncomfortable, but we've noticed in observing dogs over the last 10 years or so that a lot of them just hang out. They aren't really engaged with other dogs and playing, not like they used to. I know when I opened my daycare back in 2000, it seemed like all the dogs played. I don't think that happens all the time anymore. I think for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, and I did put a link for the Daycare 2.0 toolkit. So that toolkit does have a lot of resources on how to implement the program. And we actually have done a few other Facebook Lives about implementing Daycare 2.0. So if you're really interested in how to do that, I would go back and check out our YouTube channel. All of our Facebook Lives are on our YouTube channel, and there's a playlist that's actually on additional revenue streams, and there's several videos in that playlist on Daycare 2.0 and how to add Daycare 2.0. So if you're really looking at how do you add it, I would go back and check out those resources, because mainly we were just going to come on here today and talk about the different types of activities you can use when you do implement it. But there's a million ways to do it. We normally recommend that if you're going to add enrichment, that you start relatively small with maybe a rotation throughout the day of 3 or 4 different types of activities, and figure out how you're going to rotate those 3 or 4 different activities with the groups of dogs. And as Susan said, sometimes those groups will be larger, maybe 6 to 8. Sometimes they'll be 2 to 3. Sometimes there'll be one dog while the other dogs are in an enclosure with a puzzle toy. So there's a lot of different ways you can set that up. Again, if you're doing something like pet sitting, then I would be just adding it as a VIP option for whatever your basic pet sit is. Like they could buy an additional option for that pet sit or the dog walk for that day that includes some enrichment activities. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. In terms of other activities, though, wait, let me see. So there's another question. How would you incorporate enrichment into free play daycare to balance groups with higher energy dogs or smaller dog groups and puppies? So I think if I understand the question, I don't know that I would add it into regular free play. If you mean like groups of dogs playing, I wouldn't necessarily just take all those dogs and say we're now going to do enrichment with all these dogs. If that's your question, I would set it up so that the enrichment group is a smaller group of dogs right out of the bat. And that might be that you are mixing some of those dogs. What we actually find is you don't have that same, a lot of the dogs that don't do well in groups actually do really well in a smaller group with enrichment where they're much more focused. Whereas in a regular group, you're just letting them do whatever they want to do. And then they're like, whoa, we're out of control. So
Yeah.
you don't really get that same high energy because the dogs have a better focus because you're working with them. So I'm not sure, Katie, if that answered your question or not. Um, Maybe I totally misunderstood the question, but if I did, just put a comment back in there again. So Samantha just joined us a second ago,
Yes.
or at least she just posted in the comments. And I was going to talk about Samantha actually joined us on a Facebook Live, which is also on our YouTube channel, because she does enrichment for group with grooming. She actually does enrichment grooming. She is the only one that we know of that is doing that. But there is, if you're out there doing grooming services or you have grooming as part of your one of your services that you offer, you can add this to your grooming services and using a lot of the puzzle toys like lick mats or snuffle mats to help, not only to help with the grooming itself, but to help the dog be more comfortable while they're getting groomed. So that definitely don't rule that out. And again, I'll go back for those of you that have joined us since the beginning when I said this, any of these activities, we are assuming you are going to charge more for these. These are not just activities I would just start doing for the same price that you're offering your services now. Don't add on additional value without charging more. And in some respects, you may, if you convert your whole facility, which we have worked with companies who have converted their whole facility to enrichment, you might actually take fewer dogs and lose some of your clients, but you end up making more money because you're charging more. So if you're in a situation where you're waitlist, you're full and you can't take more dogs and you're not sure what to do about that because it's starting to get crazy with too many dogs, this is a way to clear that out too.
And it's funny, a lot of our early adopters of enrichment did it because they were so full. And it's funny how many of them have gotten back to higher numbers and wait lists now for their enrichment services. So it's definitely something that's better for the dogs. Everybody, and even the pet parents, can see that the dogs are more chilled. They seem more satisfied after a day where they've had an enrichment activities. And puzzle toys we haven't talked a lot about, but I think those are really important supplies and tools to include in your enrichment. It can either help during rest periods, you need to make sure the toy is safe to do that, or it can be its own activity. And it's funny, when we were doing this, sometimes you just have to have it on your brain. So this morning I decided that I needed to feed my kids on their licking mat. We haven't done that in a while. And they take 10 times as long to eat with a licky mat versus out of a bowl. I'm a big believer in the puzzle treats and toys.
Do you have some there you can show us?
I do. I even keep some in my office. I told Robin earlier, I'm obsessed with toys that are look like food. So JJ hangs out in my office a lot. And so I love these little French fries. And I have a little jar of treats. So it's easy. You drop treats in. He has to go through the French fries. And then the other one I like are peas in a pod. These are so cute. So there's like little holes there, and there's also little holes on the peas. And so put a few treats in, snap it up. And I had peas all over my office and kept him occupied for a good 15, 20 minutes. Obsessed with puzzle toys.
Yeah, and we have had for years Kong, that most of the company Kong has been the originator of the stuffed Kong for dogs, where you can stuff it with treats and toys and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of mental enrichment activities out there now, way more than there was 20 years ago for enrichment. And there's a lot of things that you can just build yourself. So
Yeah.
if you're creative or you just don't want to spend a lot of money, you can create even just things like with my own dog, I'll just take a water bottle and put some treats in it and toss it to him. So obviously you want to make sure whatever you're using is safe for the dogs in your daycare. So I personally think it's worth investing on some heavy duty toys just because you are going to use them a lot more than you're going to use just for like your dog at home. But there's a lot of toys out there, and there's toys that you can just put down and the dog would be okay going through them, like the Kong toy, where they're probably not going to destroy the Kong unless you have a really serious chewer. But then there's other toys that are literally puzzle games that you would want someone to be there monitoring with them. And then what you just want to balance what activities you're doing with the cost of your staff time and that kind of thing. I'll say the other way of looking at enrichment. So you can do enrichment activities as an add-on where you're just saying, hey, this is our base service, whether it's daycare training, lodging, pet sitting, dog walking, grooming, whatever. Here's our base service, but you can add on these additional elements. So you can add on 15 minutes of enrichment or 20 minutes of enrichment. So there's that option. You could also do it as a VIP program where it's like your dog's not in the regular program at all. They're in the enrichment program. So they get a lot more structure and a lot more activities. We've also seen it as a membership option where you're signing the dog up as a member, and every month, as part of every month or year or however you set up your membership program, they get a certain amount of enrichment activities. So there's a lot of different ways. One of the ways that we have seen it done though is doing enrichment as a monthly theme. So we've seen facilities where they don't just do like daily activities, they have a theme for each month. So in the winter, it might be some kind of theme that focuses around winter, or it might be a beach theme or a Valentine's theme right now. And you just come up with essentially the same games, you just give them names that go along with the month. So you could still play some cute games, but you have it centered around some type of a holiday. And for those that don't do any enrichment, that might be like sticking your toe in the water to just go, okay, let's just try enrichment at one of our parties. Again, I would be charging more for the enrichment because it is going to take your staff more time. And you do have to consider whether you can take every single dog into your enrichment program. Most of the time you can't. Unless you're just opening and you don't have a full house, most of the time you have to adjust the numbers a little so you have fewer dogs in enrichment because it is more intensive in terms of staff time. So I think that's a thing to consider as well.
And the nice thing about doing enrichment activities and doing smaller groups is it doesn't take up as much space, and you can charge more. So you're getting more revenue per square foot, which is also good for if you're running out of space. Converting to enrichment may be a way that you can make more money without having.
Andrew said, when do you recommend expanding your daycare area? We have very high numbers than previous years with different temperaments. It's hard to safely generate groups with only two sides, large and small. So I'll start. This is actually one of the reasons that we have had that Susan was alluding to earlier. This is actually one of the reasons we have had a lot of people convert to enrichment because frankly, they had too many dogs and they didn't feel it was safe. Now, I think you have to ask yourself, do you want to expand and take in more dogs, or do you want to take in more revenue? And that got legitimately asking that because for some people, the revenue factor is a driving factor more than how many dogs they have. And for other people, they truly want to serve as many dogs and as many pet parents as possible. And then for those people, growth looks different. This is the same question of should we open a second facility? Should we expand and move into the neighborhood down the street? It depends on what kind of business you want to have. So I think you have to understand what your goal is. And just because you're full is not necessarily a reason to grow. And in some cases, if you want to remain, there's a lot of people who would prefer to remain small as long as they can still make enough revenue. And daycare, adding enrichment and charging more is one of the ways you can actually do what my motto is, which is more money, less work. So my goal would not necessarily be I want to service as many dogs as possible. My goal would be I want to do as great of a service as possible and get a certain revenue goal so that I can live comfortably and do that in a way that I have the ideal client. And maybe there's fewer of those ideal clients, if that makes sense. I don't know, Susan, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I agree because it didn't take long, and when I had my daycare, that I had a third group. So definitely understand with different temperaments and sizes, and so yeah, we ran three groups for years just because of that. And then I had to have separate groups for puppies and tiny dogs, and so yeah, I ended up where we had five different groups, and that ended up taking up a lot of space, which is another reason why I like enrichment. Can integrate more dogs and more groups as long as you have a place for them to have rest periods.
The other thing, the other possibility, Andrew, for what you're describing is, if depending on what your groups look like, you might have one group that's only offered maybe twice a month, twice. So if you, for instance, puppies, maybe you only do puppies twice a week. So that takes some of those large and small dogs and puts them into a third group. But that third group's only available on certain days when you don't have as many dogs and you have the space to have a third group. So that's another option. I know, Susan, you had the tiny tails, I think.
Yep, Tiny Tails Tuesdays and Thursdays.
So
Yeah.
that's another option for that. So Jamie said, I'll mention in my classes, Jamie's a dog trainer, when talking about how do you exercise your dog, they all mention walk and fetch. I tell them about it then to help them to do mental, not just physical exercise. And whether or not they feed with a bowl, they're missing an opportunity to use some kind of puzzle toy to feed their dog. So that's excellent. And if you do dog training classes where you're doing private lessons, you could add that on as an additional option. I used to do in-home lessons. So I would go, sometimes the owner would be there, sometimes they wouldn't, but I could actually charge a little bit more and say, I'm going to spend an extra 10 minutes playing this particular game or whatever it is. So you can do that as add-ons for anything. So don't feel like enrichment, when we initially started talking about it, it was primarily focused towards the daycare, but now I really have seen that you can use it for anything. There's really no limit to what you can
Yeah,
do.
I mean, definitely pet sitting and dog walking. And you could do it while the dog's waiting to get groomed or afterwards because they aren't going to get their face messed up or anything if you're using like soft treats that aren't messy. And definitely go watch Samantha's video that we did with her. She used enrichment a lot to help groom challenging dogs, and it just makes life easier when you can distract the dog with some treats or a type of licking mat. And she has been very creative in how to implement it. And it's not just her, all of our groomers love it. We're thrilled to have her share her experience with that.
So hopefully this gave you some ideas for ways that you can start thinking about using enrichment. I know that with prices of everything going up and staffing wages going up, I know that one of our concerns at the Dog Gurus is helping our members really meet those price increases and not take that from your bottom line or not take that from the business owner's pocket. So you don't want to give yourself a decrease in salary while everyone else is getting an increase and you're paying more for stuff. And so adding enrichment, whether it's an add-on service, VIP service, or you convert your whole facility or all of your services into this as a bare minimum, is definitely something you need to consider because you're going to end up generating more revenue through this. And obviously you want to price it the right way and all of that. Again, we have a lot of information on our YouTube channel, or jump over to our Facebook group. I'll put the link for our Facebook group in there. The Facebook group is also free. Our two rules on the Facebook group is you have to be nice and you can't sell stuff. But other than that, you can get in there and ask other people what they're doing for enrichment and how they're doing it. So there's a lot of good information there as well. We did have Sarah asked, let me wait, we have a million questions now. As soon as I say, okay, we're going to hang up, then all these questions come in. So how much more would you typically recommend charging for enrichment and add-ons? So I will say for the people in daycare that have been adding enrichment, we typically see on average a $10 to $15 increase minimum for daycare enrichment. I don't know specifically for add-on, Susan, if you've seen that.
What I would do is you got to know your cost of, so how long are you going to spend? And then how much staff time actually working with the dog versus any prep time. And then also consider your supplies. It really depends on the activity and how long it lasts. I think $15 to $20 for an enrichment activity is not too much. That's 10 to 15 minutes, but you want to profit into that too.
Yeah, and the biggest thing, if you've heard us ever talk about pricing, the biggest thing is just knowing what your expense is and then making sure you're adding a profit onto that expense. And I do think there's YouTube videos out there about that too, how to price stuff. Sarah, this is an awesome idea. So Sarah says, I offer enrichment consultations, same as training consultation for clients who feel like their dog deserves more. this is awesome, Sarah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I love this. And then she says, I prepare a plan based on what they already do and the dog's breed, physical ability, etc. So that's amazing. That's an awesome thing to do. And like I said, most of you are like, nobody's going to pay for that. I know people think that, but I'm telling you, the pet parent today wants this for their dog. And frankly, those are the clients you want. Why should you be like pulling your teeth to get clients who will pay bare minimum for like little service when there are clients out there like Sarah's talking about that want more for their dog. So that's a great opportunity, Sarah, that you saw and took advantage of. And then Jamie said, I show them a Kong and my Kong holder. I love your Kong holder. I want to know what that Kong holder looks like, Jamie, because I think I might need some Kong holders. She said, I am a Kong nerd. Yes, I have a holder for mine, but I also have Wobble and a Snuffle mat, which we now sell at PetSmart. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of times pet parents don't know how much is out there. So if you can show them, I hadn't even seen the little French fry snuffle mat that Susan just showed right before we got on this Facebook Live. I was like, oh, I totally need that because I'm one of those crazy people who wants to buy all this stuff for my dog. But I think when you start showing them things, and especially if you see the dog engaged in it and the pet parent sees that, they're going to want it. Those people that want more for their dog really will take advantage of this. So it's a really good avenue to explore. It requires very little investment for you as the business owner. It's not, you don't have to go out and build enclosures and do flooring and all that. You can do it pretty much in any space that you have, including the owner's home. So it's definitely worth considering and looking into so that you can add more revenue